In 1995, who wore a famous T-shirt that read, 2,130 plus hugs and kisses for Daddy?
Sun Yi.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, the only reason he married her is she's pregnant with his next wife.
Bruce, it is such a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Thanks. Likewise.
You're an award-winning writer, actor, personality, and humorist. Where did you all...
Stripper, you forgot that part.
Where did you come from? Where did you start? What was your beginning?
Paterson, New Jersey, which is the only city in America that has its own Al-Qaeda cell, identified by the FBI. We're very proud.
I bet.
I grew up there. I was born in New York and taken to New Jersey at an early age.
That explains a lot.
I know. Right away, deprivation. And I grew up there, and I came from the kind of Jewish family that like every Jewish family, was partially in show business. I mean, they weren't really in show business, but they performed as if they were in show business. My mother wanted to be a star, and so she acted out, and I watched her do it. But I kind of grew up, I was fascinated by all of it, and it was what I wanted to do from the time I was tiny. I never really was tiny. That's probably a misnomer.
As a child, were you outgoing? Did you perform, sing, and dance, do things?
Yeah, I did. Every chance I got, I did. I was, fortunately there's no video of it, but I'd be afraid to look at it. But I mean, I did do, I was a child actor. I was never a child star, or I'd be talking to you from rehab now.
I understand.
Yeah, but I did commercials and I did things like that.
Now, I've seen your mom in your movie and in other video clips. What a personality.
Amazing.
And what a neat person.
Yeah, she's fabulous.
And I love the moment where she can't quite get it straight whether you won an Oscar for the Emmys or an Emmy for the Oscars.
You know, and I think that she represents 99.9% of the public. They don't know what these awards are. Tony, who's he? You know, they can't.
Exactly. Tony who?
Yeah, why does he get with Tony? What? That's a sports guy. What do you mean? They're kind of in the dark. They get confused by the proliferation of awards.
It's understand there are a few of them, but you have been known for years for writing the Super Bowl of awards, which is the Academy Awards. But before that, you went to college for a bit, to Ohio State.
Guilty. I'm a Buckeye.
How was that? How was that experience?
Well,
I'm a Badger from Wisconsin.
Oh, my God, so you know. But Ohio State, I went to the Midwest because I wanted to get away from New York, believe it or not, and I wanted to see some other part of the country, and that was as far as the leash would extend.
Okay.
So, but we went, a small bunch of us went to Columbus. Richard Lewis, who I grew up with pretty much. My mother was in business with his father. His father was a caterer, and my mother was a party planner. And so they did weddings, bar mitzvahs, and other affairs of state. And so I knew Richie growing up. And Judy Miller, who became Judith Miller of the New York Times. Judy Miller's father was Bill Miller, who was he had a club called Bill Miller's Riviera on the Palisades. And Jimmy Miller, Judy's brother, produced the Rolling Stones albums, the early Rolling Stones albums. And Judy went with us to Columbus, and then she left. She managed to find her way to Harvard after a year, and then became the famous Judith Miller. But we traipsed to Columbus, Ohio. You know, we were like the East Coast Jews coming in.
And how did you like
planting
it?
a flag?
What was it like?
It was amazing because it was the '60s. I mean, it was. You know, the big farm, we called it. I mean, Columbus was the big city in that part of the Midwest, and their idea of Cleveland was a really big town. That was the Emerald City. But Columbus was in the middle of the state, and it was lots of farmers and very bucolic, and it churned out workers for the state. You know, teachers and farmers, and went to agriculture school, which was big. And football was the major league sport. And So I got a taste of that in the first year or so, and then everything changed because the revolution began. Vietnam was happening, and if you did not go to college, you were drafted, and if you were drafted, you were immediately sent over. So everybody had a student deferment, except Oliver Stone. I'm going. He went, and 17 movies later, we see why. But you know, I was amused later on when we all grew up, and people were running for president, you know, who were my age, and they would talk about where they were during Vietnam, and like, well, Bill Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar, and he had a special difference. Dan Quayle was an ROTC, so he didn't have to go. Everybody had a way of not going, except, of course, for the working class kids who didn't have anything. So, but the tenor on the campus changed. I mean, the revolution really began.
At that point, you left Ohio State.
I did.
And went on to...
I graduated and I went to the Chicago Tribune. At first I was at the Miami Herald, the Detroit Free Press, and then I wound up in Chicago because the big papers at the time were looking for the key to the youthful audience. And so they were very busy hiring kids out of college because we could tell them what young people wanted. So, of course, you know, we didn't know what young people wanted. We knew what we wanted. And, of course, you know, I mean, I particularly wanted to know all the old Hollywood people who were running to me saying, well, what do these kids want? You know, you meet Cary Grant, and he's wearing beads and a paisley shirt, you know, so he'll look up to date. And I said, but you're Cary Grant. You didn't have to do that. You're classic. You don't have to pretend that you're, you know, Ringo.
Well, it was kind of throughout Hollywood in the 60s after Easy Rider, wasn't it?
Right,
All the studio executives started dressing like idiots, actually.
It was, you know, it's a variation of what still goes on, which is everybody wants to look 26 years old. I mean, that's never changed, and they want to be in touch with the target market, which is, you know, younger.
That's a good way of putting it.
And I didn't realize until later on that was just a manifestation of it. I thought at the time, oh, they're all trying to be very hip, and they're like, you know, loosening their bonds. But in fact, they were just trying to stay up.
What happened at the Chicago Tribune? How did that work out, and what did you do exactly?
I was a feature writer. I did all the Rex Reedy pieces. I interviewed all the stars when they came through town to promote their pictures, and I did a variety of things. I did stunt kind of columns. I traded places with a suburban housewife, and I became a Mr. Mommy. And John Hughes was a copywriter at Leo Burnett in Chicago at the time, and he called me up and he said, I want to do a movie. He wasn't in movies yet. He said, I want to do a movie of Mr. Mommy. And I thought, well, you're not in movies. How are you going to make this work? And we had a nice conversation. That was that. And then some years later, I saw Mr. Mom, which was, you know, and so I said...
Yes, he figured out a way to do it.
That's right. He said, I'm coming to see you. He said, bring it on. And of course, you know, I mean, I never did. It was like, you know, there's so many ideas that, you know, people have that, you know, we all had the idea about three old bags living in Miami Beach together. It was, you know, it was called Miami Nice. That was the code at NBC for what became the Golden Girls. And everybody came in with the Golden Girls. And there would be like Miami Nice #3, Miami Nice #4. And Susan Harris came in with B. Arthur and Betty White and Rue McClanahan, and she got the deal. Of course, she also wrote a great script, and it was a terrific show. But my point is that everybody has an idea will float around, and it's got to really be unique in order for you to have a case.
Do you find just when you are at events, people come up to you and just say, I have a great idea for a show? And
oh, all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
I have the same experience to a lesser degree than you do.
But what's amazing is they will then pitch an idea to you that has been on the air for 5 years. So you asked what happened at the Tribune. What, other than writing that kind of stuff, what happened was I met Bette Midler. She was just starting out. She was on Broadway in Fiddler on the Roof, and she came to play a nightclub in Chicago, and I went to see her because I knew her manager, and I wrote about her because she was amazing, I thought. And a couple of days after the story appeared, she called me up and we had lunch again, and she said, that was a very funny story, you should write. You're a very funny writer. And I said, well, you're very funny too, you should talk more on stage. And she said, you got any lines? and that was 40 years ago, which is unusual because she's only 36.
Astounding how she.
How does she do it? I don't know.
Well, she looks good for 36.
She looks good. She does. Now she's on Broadway playing Sue Mengers, so she doesn't have to look as good, but she looks good enough.
Exactly. So you've had a long relationship with her.
Yeah.
Have you worked on a variety of her shows and written her lines?
Pretty much all of the live stuff that she does is Bette Midler, you know, and occasionally I've Midlerized a movie here and there with a line, but it's all the stuff that where she is herself that I've worked on. And I've pretty much worked on all of it.
And she's also a good friend.
She's a great friend. She's terrific.
Now, how did that lead to other things?
Well, we had
How did you get started from the Tribune to?
There was a core group of people around Bette who branched out on their own. Her piano player was Barry Manilow, and the first backup singers that she had were Melissa Manchester and Luther Vandross.
She could pick them.
Yeah, genius. I mean, the choreographer was Michael Bennett, and the dresses were by Norma Kamali, who was the wardrobe mistress on Fiddler on the Roof. She absorbed everything from everybody, and she was surrounded by brilliantly talented people. And when we needed an opening act, I knew Liza Minnelli, and she said, well, my ex-husband is looking, Peter Allen has split up with his partner, and would you use him? So Peter was the opening act at one point. And I started writing for all of these people as they broke off. And pretty soon I had a whole roster of people I was writing for. In addition, people would come through Chicago and I would interview them, and they would say what Bette had said, which was, could you write some stuff for me? And so I went to the Captain and Tennille had a variety show, and my agent sent me in to meet them, and they looked at my list and they said, well, you're just too hip for us. So I thought, oh my God, I've written myself a death sentence. I'm too hip.
It's a very fair statement, though.
So I called Florence Henderson, and I said, I'm too hip. She said, I know how you feel. So I was kind of amazed. I didn't expect that. But she said, look, we're doing the Brady Bunch Variety Hour.
Now, at what point did you move out?
I moved out in '75 because Bette had a dresser, a girl named Fayette, who was genius, whose brother was Tim Hauser, who had founded the Manhattan Transfer. We put their act together, and Bette's manager came in, and we did a showcase in New York at a club called The Bottom Line, which was very big at the time. And Fred Silverman, who had run every single network in America, and he booked them for a summer TV show. And so I came out here in the summer of '75 to do the 4 TV shows. And I stayed. There was the end of variety television, which we didn't realize at the time, but it was the last gasp of variety TV because cable had come in. So it ended the specialness, and variety just kind of melted away. And also, the new entertainers weren't schooled in the old variety. Yep. You know, they weren't the old kind of Catskills tumblers.
Well, it's an interesting phenomena, isn't it? That these actors really do not have their own personality or do not know what to say when asked to speak spontaneously.
Yeah, well, if they're really actors, they're in character. If they're performers, they have a performance persona that they use.
Now, if you have someone who has a persona, a personality, do you try to tailor what you're saying and the jokes and the nature of what they say to that?
Sure, absolutely. But generally, their personality comes from stuff that they've done already. Dean Martin came out, and everybody would assume he was drunk, and so that was the starting point.
Right.
You know, everything he did was funny because he was drunk doing it. And Nicole Smith had the same thing, but she didn't know it. She was just drunk. It's always based on something, on some character point or something that they've done.
You've done a tremendous number of award shows, but you're best known for the Academy Awards.
Sure, it's the biggest, as you say, the Super Bowl of...
And how did that get started? How did you start as a writer there? How did that happen?
I had written a couple of things for people on the side, or when Bette made her appearances on the Oscar show. I wrote with her the things that and they were a big hit. But what finally got me on it was a guy named Alan Carr. He was a big flamboyant producer, and marketer. He was really quite a brilliant marketer. And so the Academy went out on a limb and asked him to produce the show. And he brought me in as a writer. And I wrote pretty much the whole show, except the opening number, which involved Snow White visiting Hollywood, and became notorious. And I didn't write that. That was sort of imported from San Francisco, from Beach Blanket Babylon. And it became notorious for two reasons. One is Disney sued over the use of Snow White, but they had no rights in Snow White's public domain. Right. And the other thing that was famous for was Rob Lowe. And the reason that Rob Lowe doing singing Proud Mary with Snow White became famous was 2 weeks after the show aired, the Rob Lowe sex tape appeared. And so suddenly Rob Lowe was everywhere. And every time they mentioned Rob Lowe, they would say, Rob Lowe, who recently disgraced himself on the Academy Awards dancing with Snow White. You know, it was a bad idea, but I mean, I said at the time, it's in the tradition of horrifying production numbers on the Oscar show.
Yes.
You know, the previous year they'd had Terry Garr on an airplane wing doing Flying Down to Rio, but Rio didn't sue. I think if the numbers were any good, people would sort of say, well, that was, you know, they would like it to be big and balabusta.
There's an argument. You have to do something truly stupid in order to make it interesting. Because otherwise, you know, you slog through it with one award after another. You need some cleverness, and you have to take some chances.
It's always going to be weird because you're dealing with. It's not the Grammys where you can have Pink do a trapeze act. You know, I mean, it's
a good point.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Oscars, and everything has to be related to the movies and the music from the movies. And what looks great on stage in the house may not translate to TV, to the camera. It's a tightrope act, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it's Snow White.
And when you write these shows, I would think this would be tremendously difficult to fit it to a particular situation, to a particular personality. I would think this is one of the most difficult writing jobs.
Yeah, it is. It is because as you say, you're writing to a specific personality, and they have to get a job done. They have to present an award that most of the audience doesn't really care about. Right. I mean, they're not. To make documentary short subject riveting is a fool's errand, and. So you basically just have to be sincere or be very funny about something else. But everything is written to order. And it's when you compare it with the Super Bowl, it's very true. I mean, things that you do, a joke you might do on Letterman that would disappear after the 24-hour news cycle will live forever with the Oscars. Yes. I mean, this is now part of Seth MacFarlane's CV.
Well, they're still talking about it.
Yeah, they'll talk about it for the rest of his life. Bette's running joke is like when she dies, the obituary will say, Bette Midler dies, singer started in gay bathhouse. He said, that's it. It's one of those things that will be part of the iconography about you. And so people are mindful of that when they say they'll do the show. They don't want to do something that they're going to have to remember for the rest of their lives. And eventually, Sally Field, 20 years after you like me, you really like me, managed to do it as a Visa commercial. So, she got some cash out of it. But she's monetized her osteoporosis, so I think the Sally is really where it's at. I said to my agent, any physical condition you want me to have, I'll pretend to have if they'll pay me. If she can get on there and sell Boniva, I'll sell anything.
Seems very reasonable. Now, when you do your writing, do you find that it is more of a collaborative process or a solitary process or a bit of both? It's
exactly both. It is both. I mean, all writing, the kind of writing I do is mostly collaborative, but there's always a point where it's just me facing the blank screen. I know it's going to be both. I know there will be a balance between the two.
Okay.
I think novelists have a different energy. They get up in the morning and they are really by themselves in the life of their characters. But I'm kind of a social creature, so it worked out that I do something that often happens around the table and is often a negotiation, especially when you're writing for these kinds of shows when people are themselves, not the characters you've created, and so you're literally putting words in their mouth, and so they have a position about it.
Well, then you have some people who are so talented on their own, like a Billy Crystal or a Whoopi Goldberg, and then someone like Robin Williams, who's totally out of control at all times. How do you write for someone like a Robin Williams, who is so...
With Robin, the writing, you sit down and have a conversation because it all springs out.
Yes.
And you just record it or take great notes. The recording is good. And then you can synthesize it and put it on a piece of paper and show it.
Shape it a little bit.
Right. And he tends to do things in performance. A lot of comics we'll sit down and write something, and then in performance they'll begin embroidering. I do it myself when I'm performing.
Sure.
You find that that's when the inspiration hits. You know, panic is the mother of invention.
Now, you've also done songwriting.
Yes, I have.
Do you write both lyrics and music, or just lyrics?
Just lyrics. Just lyrics. And most of the lyrics...
And I don't mean just lyrics to diminish lyrics. Lyrics are critical.
Yeah, they are, but most of the lyrics I've written have been to melodies that existed, or I'm handed the melody, and I write the lyric to it. You know, so I mean, pure lyric writers like Oscar Hammerstein would sit down and write a lyric. It's like it's being a poet, only it's also realizing that there is a composer who's going to have to take this and make something out of it. So you are writing in musical rhythms, and then you hand it to the composer, and the composer creates that thing. I mean, that to me is the real. That's the real deal. I mean, you know, what I do, I'm fitting things to what's already in the music. And I think I've been afraid to actually sit down and write lyrics, you know, from the jump. But I have.
But you're good at it.
I have done. Thanks.
You're very clever.
Ooh. I've done. What's popular in pop music is to sit in a room, a composer and a lyricist, and write the song at the same time. I mean, that was how Peter Allen worked. I mean, I watched him do it a lot. I mean, he would go to Carol Sager's house, and they would sit down for an afternoon, and they would emerge with a song.
You have a book to your credit?
I do. I'm writing another one now. That was a book because I was on Hollywood Squares. You know, when you're on television every night, they run to you with book offers.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, because you're in front of the public every night, so they figure somebody will buy it.
Must be a book there.
There's a book there, and of course I didn't have time at the time to write a book, so we cobbled together a book from articles I'd written for all different kinds of magazines.
Yes.
And I didn't mean it to be a piece of lasting literature. I mean, that stuff that you write on deadline for magazines is not, you know, you don't think it's going to be to last with the ages, and it didn't. But now I'm actually writing one that I'm hoping will have a little bit more traction.
Well. What you wrote was a collection of essays, and that's actually a time-honored way to write a book.
Yeah.
So I think it kind of worked. And then you have a movie, Get Bruce.
Yes.
Which is essentially about people's need for you and demand for you.
Yes. It's a deconstruction of comedy writing of a specific...
And perhaps some construction.
Yeah, yeah.
Again, I was so intrigued by the relationship you had with your mom and her personality and the way it reflected back with you and your personality, and how alike the two of you were in many ways. And
yeah, well, she's a pistol, which in this era of gun control probably is the wrong thing to call her. But she really is amazing. I mean, as we speak, she's 93 years old and drives herself to the canasta games every day, and you know.
So she's still totally with it.
Totally with it, and amazing.
To drive.
Yeah, drive and to keep score. Hello. And to cheat. No, I mean, she doesn't cheat, but she could because she's got all of her marbles.
Potentially.
But I keep telling her that. You'll break down and become a cheater because you'll realize the other girls have no idea what you're doing.
Now, you spent a good deal of time on the Hollywood Squares as a celebrity square,
yeah,
as the head writer.
I was.
How did that come about?
Bizarre. Well,
what was it like?
Well, you know, this was the third iteration of Hollywood Squares. It had started in 1967 and ran for 14 years on NBC. And along the way, it picked up Paul Lynde, and he eventually became the center square.
Well, he's a story in himself.
He's 30 years he's been gone, and they still write books about him. So, I mean, clearly he made a mark. Although he never thought so. He was miserably unhappy and was not doing what he really wanted to do. And it's grossly ironic that he...
And he enjoyed his second and third drink, I think.
Oh, he enjoyed, yes. Well, he enjoyed them. People around him didn't.
That's what I understand.
After the first drink, they were, it was delightful. And after the second drink, suddenly it was the Wannsee Conference, and he was, planning the death of the Jews. So he wasn't...
Oh, dear.
Oh, yeah, he was Nazi hike. He was tough. He was hard to take if he'd been drinking. Otherwise, he was a pussycat. But so I was working on the Donnie and Marie show, and Paul was also a regular on the Donnie and Marie show. So I would go with him. He would, at the end of the taping day, he would go to Burbank to tape Hollywood Squares because they used to shoot it at night. And as I was leaving, he would come over because I just written whatever he had done on Donnie and Marie, and he would say, "Come with me to Squares. I haven't got shit." And we'd go in the car. And we'd drive along, and you'd have the questions, and we would write jokes, write the joke, and things like, who named Attila the Hun? I did. I said, "Attila, hello, Hun." Those things, and we had a great time. And then he would do them, and then the show went off the air, and then it came back in the '80s with Joan Rivers, and Waylon Flowers and Madam were on it, and I was writing stuff for him the same way, and then. And then this third iteration happened. John Moffat and Pat Lee, who were friends of mine I had worked with on other shows, called me and said, "We're doing Hollywood Squares. It's coming back, but we want to do it more as a comedy show. We want to stock it with as many comics as we can and de-emphasize the game part of it. And we're going to need a head writer to keep coming up with these jokes." And they offered me the job. So I took it, and we started in. And as we were putting it together, they then got Whoopi to be the center square. They wanted a big name for the center square. And she took the job, and they didn't have a host. And she said, "Well, I think that Vilanch should host it." And they all kind of looked around, and they thought, "Well, she's nuts, but it's too early in the game to piss her off." So they tested me. They brought me in, and I had to say, "This is for the win, Louise." Stuff that hosts do.
Yes.
And and they sat me down and they said, "Well, you're not exactly mainstream, but we'd like to put you up in the grid. We're going to give you a square." So they put me next to Whoopi, and I think they were hoping that I would tame her because they were kind of afraid of her. And what they didn't realize, of course, was that
you were the problem.
Yeah, that she's really a Jewish kid, and I am really a black woman. And ask anyone I've dated. And and so we were up there just like making mischief, but I had a great time, and it translated to the camera. So I wound up doing it, for the 4 years that she was on the show. I was up there almost every show.
I'll go with Bruce Vilanch for the block.
Bruce Vilanch to block. Bruce. All right, Bruce. A national magazine reports that old men in Holland who had a drink or two every day were twice as likely to have what?
Their fingers in the dike.
Now, as the head writer for a show like that, what do you write?
Well, there are. You know how the show works is there's a question, and then there'll be a joke answer or a bluff answer. The contestant agrees or disagrees. We would give funny people a joke that they could use that would respond to the question, and then we'd give them a bluff. Everybody got a bluff because they had to give some kind of an answer, and it was the bluff would be an answer that could be right but wasn't. What we discovered was that we had to stop giving jokes to people who weren't funny because they would be determined to do them, and 9 out of 10 times it would just sort of sit there, I mean, we would say the cricket is the official bird of Hollywood Squares because there were so many crickets. There would be like, Winona does a joke and silence in the crowd.
Good time for meditation.
Yeah, right, exactly. Eyes down. So we would only give them, like to people who we knew. Fortunately, we had a lot of really funny people. I mean, Gilbert Gottfried and Caroline Ray and Brad Garrett, and the volume of work was tremendous in between the shooting days because you had to compile hundreds and hundreds of jokes. It was surprisingly heavy, the workload, but not.
You got through.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not like Tolstoy heavy,
Well, but it's a different sort of pressure.
Yeah, but yeah. Just listen. Dying is easy. Comedy is hard. There's no pressure like trying to get a laugh.
As a part of that, in addition to the other things, you become quite a personality and a well-beloved personality. People like you, and you've got some trademarks, including your eyeglasses and
Why, yes.
and your T-shirts.
Yeah, it's a signature look. And it happened. Truthfully, it happened by accident. I was my mother, who's totally fastidious, and insisted that I always look just so, and dressed me up, in jackets and ties. And I was a fat kid with a big neck, and I was never comfortable. Nothing ever fit. And so I determined that once I became an adult, I would never dress up. And so I fortunately collided with the hippie era, where you didn't have to wear anything. And then I moved to LA, where
no one wears anything.
No one wears anything. So I developed a kind of T-shirts. They were the easiest thing. And of course, I found T-shirts with ironic sayings on them, and that became my look. And since I could grow hair, I decided to grow a lot of it. I never got out of the hippie phase. Thank you. Thank you, darling.
Now, you're also an actor. You've been in a variety of movies and musicals, including Hairspray.
I did Hairspray for 2 years.
How was that experience?
It was my favorite thing I've ever done. I mean, it was everything but the pantyhose. The pantyhose were unbearable, but the rest of it was amazing. I mean, I did a year on the road and then a year on Broadway, and it was an incredible learning experience, and it touched an OCD button I didn't know I had. I mean, you do a show 8 times a week, and you go in every day and say, what can we do tonight that will be different from the others? And it's the same show, but you must keep yourself fresh. And I discovered I kind of liked that. I liked the challenge of that. And of course, Hairspray is an easy show to do vis-a-vis the audience. The minute you get on stage, the audience is having such a good time.
Right.
I understand Vanessa Redgrave now. If I had to do Medea 8 times a week, kill the children and drag the bodies around,
yep.
I don't know that I'd be so lighthearted at the end of the week.
I understand.
So, if she's a little bit crazy, I kind of get it.
Some weeks with children, you might feel
it's the same, right, exactly.
It might be a perfectly fine experience.
Right. Proxy death.
Very life-enhancing. But you raised a fascinating point, which is I admire the actors and the singers and dancers who can do the same show night after night. That is, you must have found that very hard work.
I did, and sometimes you don't feel like doing it, but that show in particular invites you in.
Yes.
I mean, you do want to do the work, but it is very hard work, and what's amazing is that the work ethic has changed. I mean, Bet was telling me that when she was in Fiddler on the Roof, which was the late 60s, early 70s,
yes.
You did 8 a week. I mean, people didn't call out, which is the expression that they use for not doing the show that night. You did it. You just, that was your job. They'd fire you if you didn't, if you called out too much, and nobody did. But now people call out all the time, and it's a friend of mine who did, Larry Fuller, who choreographed Evita, the original production of Evita, said that the opening night was the last performance where they had the entire original company in the show. The show ran 3 or 4 years. They never had the entire company. Somebody was always out for the rest of the 3. I mean, that would have been unheard of years ago. Ethel Merman is legendary for not missing shows. Right. Carol Channing doesn't miss shows. I mean, the work ethic has changed. That being said, it's really hard work. I mean, it's a lot more than it used to be. I think the dancers have to be singers, you know, and because that's the economics of the situation. So, even there, times have changed.
Do you enjoy musicals and going to musicals?
Oh yeah, I love going to musicals. My favorite thing.
When you were younger, was there anyone who you particularly?
When I was a kid, well, I loved Merman, but she was in a show called Happy Hunting that was not a hit, but I just worshipped it. And Judy Holliday in Bells Are Ringing. I think I saw it 16 times. I would go standing room. Well, she was just amazing. I mean, her technique was just. She was so natural, but you knew it, but every move was planned. I mean, you know, it was the same. I mean, I watch Nathan Lane now, and he's got that incredible technique. And it was what I aspired to in Hairspray, to be able to do it the same, but have a different energy. Maybe, I don't know. It was ultimately I was doing it the same way, but I was working myself up.
To have seen her in person, you know, I've seen.
To see Judy Holliday?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that they say about theater actors where she filled the room.
Yep.
I mean, the theater, of course, is designed for that kind of personality, who comes out and smiles, and she just takes the whole place in her embrace. And you don't see a whole lot of that anymore because, you know, it's I guess a dying art. People do obviously show up and do it, but and then it was the little things that she did that just that were brilliant.
Another star that I've really admired is Elizabeth Montgomery.
Oh, I love this.
She did.
She was a good friend.
And I wanted to see if you could comment on your friendship with her and her work and what she did.
Well, you know, the thing about Lizzie was, you know, she grew up Hollywood royalty. Her father was Robert Montgomery, and so she had the very privileged Beverly Hills childhood, and she kind of snuck into acting because she was afraid that they would say, "Oh, she's only being hired because she's his daughter," and but you know, she made her bones doing television drama. The famous Twilight Zone episode that she did, where she didn't speak anything at all, and she had established herself as that kind of an actress. And then along came Bewitched, and suddenly she was Lucy. You know, she was the new version of Lucy. She was an adorable sitcom star, and that was so away from what she had wanted to do that by the time I got to know her, she had gotten through that phase and made a lot of money and used her name, her stardom, to do a series of TV movies because she couldn't get anywhere in features. So she did TV movies where she got to play the kind of parts that a generation earlier she would have played in major studio pictures when her father was working. And they were important. I mean, A Case of Rape was one of the first big social issue television shows, and the Lizzie Borden, that story, which was, you know, a whole history come to life. She did a series of stuff that was really, really strong, and her audience followed her into that. I mean, she kind of led them into that. I mean, you know, whether you like this or not, she single-handedly created that whole Lifetime kind of model of women in jeopardy movies. She was really happy doing that. I mean, it was strange because she knew that even though she was not going to win an Academy Award, I mean, I think the one movie that she was in, she played opposite Dean Martin. It was a comedy, and Carol Burnett played her best friend. So this was never going to get her into the movie business, but she was very happy doing that kind of stuff and very dedicated to all of that, and she knew it in some ways. She lived in Hollywood and she was of Hollywood, but she knew that she wasn't mainstream Hollywood because she was television. But she was doing what she liked to do, and she had a great marriage to Robert Foxworth in the end, and they were incredibly compatible. She was great. The tragedy of Lizzie was she was a very heavy drinker, and she would let things slide. She didn't believe in doctors, and she developed a kind of cancer that had she been paying attention, they most likely would have gotten. But by the time the symptoms were so great that she couldn't ignore them, it was too late.
Bruce, you are involved in so many charity events and seem so generous with your time and your effort and your talents. Why do you do that?
Oh, I think it's the way I was raised. My parents were very involved in charities, and it's an old Jewish tradition. It's called Rachmanis. It's the Yiddish word. It means compassion, and we're raised. I mean, not to put too serious a mark on it, but when you grow up Jewish in America, or anywhere probably except Israel, and even there maybe, you discover that a lot of people hate you and no one's going to help you and you're going to have to do it for yourself. And so the Jewish community has always been at the forefront of taking care of its own. And I've always thought that was a terrific model for the gay community, because we live in a similar minority situation. And so I've gotten involved in getting charities up and running to take care of that community. And it was not a priority until the AIDS epidemic happened, and then it was a matter of life and death.
Yes.
And that infrastructure became the marriage equality infrastructure that has moved things forward to where they are today.
Well, and you've not only been involved in AIDS charities, but a variety of others. But let's focus on the AIDS plague for a moment here. That must have been searing for you, because you must have seen so many funerals and so many great friends. How did you make it through that time?
With humor is probably the only way. I mean, hundreds of people died, and you can be angry about it, which I was and am, and then you can take positive steps to do something about it, which I did also. And in a literal sense, I mean, we just started getting shows up to raise money for things, and I think I just kind of worked through the angst. But there sure was a lot of it. I mean, it has eased off, but it was pretty awful. I mean, it was devastating. Certain parts of the community were so devastated. I mean, we joked that the musical theater lost all the leading lights. Not only that, but somebody made a very interesting point the other day in a conversation. Said we lost the audience. A lot of that smart, sophisticated audience also died off.
Yes.
And it was the beginning of the dumbing down and of the arrival of the British faux operas, that people loved so much. So the effect was profound, but also, I mean, in what generation do you have this tremendous amount of loss of young people? I mean, where has that happened before? I used to compare it to the Holocaust, where if you were living in Berlin, and the Jews just began disappearing, and I can't think of any other modern situation where a generation has had to endure that.
I think that is the only modern situation for a particular community. You have used humor to make serious points and to get at real truths. It seems like one of the best ways to do that, because it softens the edge of really hard issues sometimes. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me you're about as good at it as anyone who's currently doing it. What kinds of advice or guidance would you give to people who are starting out or want to work in this business, or who are just into their career and want to be writers and want to do this kind of work? Are there some guidance you can give them?
Be funny.
That's hard to do.
I know. Yeah.
It's easier to die.
Right, exactly. It sure is. And you can do both at the same time if you really work at it.
Yes, it's true.
If they want to be in the comedy business, I think in addition to being funny, I think that they just have to be prepared to give it away a lot. At the beginning, you just give it away, and that's how you get your reputation.
Okay.
And then you'll get work from that. So find somebody who you think is funny and throw yourself on them and say, I want to write for you. Because what happens with the performers is when they're at the beginning of their careers and nobody's terribly interested, they have a lot of time to write. And when they hit, and suddenly they're in the star-making machinery, and there are things that they must do, there are photo shoots, there are interviews, there are
Parties.
traveling, parties, things, they have less time. The time they used to spend writing now is spent being themselves, in quotes. And that's when they begin to take on collaborators, because they need to keep the engine going.
Have you found that a challenge for yourself? Because you are so much in demand as a personality.
I have, actually. I don't get to write as much as I used to, so yes, I have, but I don't mind that. I mean, I always was an actor. I was a child actor, so I guess this is what I really wanted to do, and the writing it was a function of that. So I try to keep a balance, but yeah.
Well, it's part of the overall talent picture for you. But getting back to people who are starting out, you're saying do the work.
Yeah. I also think that, especially if you're going to be in the comedy game, I can't overstress the importance of working with an audience, of doing things that are actually seen. I mean, if that means doing an improv group or writing a play or doing something where there's a live audience in there. So many of the people who make movies now don't come out of live audience experience. They come out of film school.
Yes.
And they've studied all the text, and they've studied, you know, Robert McKee, and they know all of this stuff, but they've never actually had to sit there and listen to a joke bomb. The closer you get to an audience, the better off you will be. Even if what you really want to do is film, you need to be where an audience is. One of the reasons that the people from Saturday Night Live have gotten such traction is that they have to make an audience laugh every week on national television. And so you can kind of trust an Adam Sandler because he's been in the trenches, and his career is not accidental. He knows what he's doing. He knows what that audience in the theater is going to do, how they're going to respond, because he has the practical thing. Jim Carrey comes from that also, but there are people who don't, who have a harder time with it.
Do you recommend reading and keeping up with newspapers and
Sure.
and tabloids and everything else in order to get ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody does that. I mean, I think that I mean, I don't think you have to be Dick Wolf, and read the New York Post and there are 7 Law and Order episodes on the first 12 pages. Right. I mean, that's
different.
A valid approach, and God knows it works. But I think in the ordinary, you find what you want to say, and then you follow that stream of news or that field or whatever. I mean, I know people who are devoted to the crime stories because they are looking for a crime story that will be the beginning of something else.
Yeah.
That isn't just a crime story for its own sake, but is something that leads to something bigger.
Well, you borrow from things. It isn't plagiarizing. It's really just being inspired and trying to figure out your own take on it.
It's only plagiarism if you like word for word. I mean, there's a lot of homage going on also.
Yes.
But
that's a balancing act.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
And also, as I say, there are so few unique things. I mean, if somebody came up with a story about Nazis searching for the lost Torah, which is buried somewhere in the desert, I don't think 2 people would come up with that. I mean, statistically, I'm sure they could, but it's highly unlikely that another person came up with that idea. So, I think but it's that kind of, that degree of uniqueness. I mean, unique is unique, but most things are not unique.
Yeah, but you still seem to come up with a lot of stuff or a way of looking at things that other people do not. And it's fascinating. I'm not sure where that comes from, your genius.
It's just a way of looking at the world. I don't know where, I mean, it's a compendium of a lot of stuff. It just may be me, I don't know. I certainly know the influences. I mean, I grew up listening to my mother, who was really funny and had great timing, and I know I've appropriated that. But, you know, I know children of great comedians who also grew up in the house with a great comedian, and they don't have that. So I think it's the luck of the draw.
It certainly has worked, and you've been an inspiration to a lot of people, both in the work you've done and the charity work you've done. So thank you very much. Thanks for having this conversation.
Certainly. Thank you.